Had some health issues of my own that I couldn't quite wrap my head around, and allopathic medicine was sending me down paths that I didn't like, or I didn't agree with, or I just simply didn't want to go down. Surgical procedures and drugs I didn't want to take, and started looking at the gut microbiome and how the bacteria in the gut controls about every metabolic function in the human body. And in fact, one of my mentors I kind of listen to a lot is a Dr. Amin Zergani out of France, and he calls it the biggest blind spot in medicine. The human gut microbiome, he said, is the biggest blind spot in medicine because there's 100 trillion organisms. There's over 10,000 species that we've identified, but there's more and more that we don't know about the gut.
Welcome to the CoachMD podcast. I'm Dr. Charles Glassman, bringing you 3 decades of experience as a physician and a coach. Join us as we navigate the maze of medical advice with real-life stories, empowering you to take charge of your health. In our That Happens segment, guests share transformative experiences, reminding us that we're all human and not just patients. So get ready for a journey into healthcare reimagined, where empowerment and discovery pave the way. Hey, it's Dr. Charles, aka CoachMD. In my over 30 years of medical practice, I've made it my goal to help people to create strong minds, healthy bodies, and unshakable spirits. And I like to bring guests on my show who can contribute to that and who are a little bit out of the box. The medicine, especially conventional medicine, kind of has a myopic view a lot of times. And it's just what we're taught in medical school, that's the way it is. You don't question. And there's so much in science that's developing that is so interesting and so vital to our well-being and really could help us. And my guest today, Ty Griffin, is in the industry, the microbiome industry. And I mean, no offense, but you have to be living under a rock if you haven't heard about the microbiome, because it's everywhere. Everybody's talking about it. I had Ty on my show last year, and it was such a great conversation. I wanted to have him back. And so thanks a lot, Ty, for coming back and letting us pick your brain a little bit.
Yeah, absolutely. Great to be back. To be back.
If you could give us a little bit about your background and tell us kind of what brought you into this space, and tell us what this space really is. What is the microbiome?
Yeah, so I've spent 30 years on the industry side, mostly on infectious diseases, launching antibiotics for industry, bringing antibiotics to market, antifungals, stuff to kill bacteria in the human body. And about 5-10 years ago, just started changing my direction. I had met a CMO at one of my companies, and he had kind of interested me in the gut microbiome. Had some health issues of my own that I couldn't quite wrap my head around, and allopathic medicine was sending me down paths that I didn't like, or I didn't agree with, or I just simply didn't want to go down. Surgical procedures and drugs I didn't want to take, and so it just kind of made me really start digging in. And when I did my own research and started talking to different industry researchers and stuff, I started looking at the gut microbiome and how the bacteria in the gut controls about every metabolic function in the human body. And in fact, one of my mentors I kind of listen to a lot is a Dr. Amin Zergani out of France, and he calls it the biggest blind spot in medicine. The human gut microbiome, he said, is the biggest blind spot in medicine because there's 100 trillion organisms. There's over 10,000 species that we've identified, but there's more and more that we don't know about the gut and the human microbiome. And it correlates to soil microbiomes and what we eat. And it's just such a connected but massive spot in medicine. And allopathic medicine hadn't embraced it as much as, say, functional or integrative medicine has. There's a lot more in that space where they're kind of forging or blazing the trail. There's a ton on the research side, but it doesn't seem to come to fruition as much. I don't know. It's a space in medicine that's really hard to monetize. It's hard to operationalize. Even though the gut microbiome, fecal transplants are 2,000
Yeah.
years old.
And I do want to talk about that, Ty. Definitely. I want
Yeah,
to get to the fecal transplants. We'll definitely talk about that. I just, a few things you said I really wanted to drive home. And
yeah,
how many trillion? You said a trillion organisms?
100 trillion
100
organisms.
trillion bacterial organ living within us. Now let that sink in, okay?
Yeah,
Let that sink in. That's more than the cells in our body.
absolutely,
Okay, this
absolutely.
is an it's an environment of living organisms within us, going about their lives, going about their existence, metabolizing things, ingesting things to survive, spitting stuff out. So it has to have an effect on us, right? I mean, how can it
Absolutely.
not? It's part of us. So yeah, I just wanted to drive that point home.
Yeah.
And
So
talk to us
yeah,
about that.
so modern day research shows that most Americans, most people living in the United States, eating a Western diet or an American diet, actually are missing almost half of their microbiome from a diversity and richness standpoint. They
Hmm.
might have a lot of bacteria still, but they have lost good bacteria. It's gone extinct.
Now,
The
how does that happen?
So there's a multitude of ways that bacteria die in our body. The easiest and most obvious is antibiotics.
Right.
Antibiotics that you take, antibiotics that are in your food. People don't realize, I mean, when we look at food, everybody thinks that when they're scared of antibiotics, they're thinking chicken and meat, but actually it's cheeses,
Wow.
shredded cheeses. They add a macrolide antibiotic to cheese called natamycin. Natamycin is a mold inhibitor in cheese, but in your gut, it's an antibiotic. It kills off bacteria slowly. So when you stop at the local cheese or local pizza place, they buy all their shredded cheese pre-shredded from a wholesaler like Cisco or US Foods or whatever their distributor of choice is. That cheese has natamycin in it. There's only a couple of distributors that might have one option of cheese that doesn't have, and it's not just the antibiotics. There's anti-caking agents in there. There's flow agents and stuff like that. And the gut's kind of an interesting space, right? The bacteria lives in the mucosal layer of the gut. So there's a thick mucosa from your esophagus all the way to your anus. And that mucosa is where the bacteria live.
Okay, so let
Most
me
of,
just back up for a second. Okay, so
yeah,
when you're talking about mucosa, explain that. So the gut, the esophagus that you said, the stomach, the small intestine, the colon, out
mm-hmm.
the rectum, the anus, it's a tube, right?
Right,
So we
right,
know that's a tube. Things go through it. So what is the mucosa? What is
so,
that, and how does the
yeah.
bacteria interplay with that?
So there's a thick wall of mucosa that surrounds that and it
Okay,
encapsulates
so
that.
those are
And then
cells.
and those are cells. It's where that bacteria harbors. Most of your biome is in your intestine, right?
Yeah.
Your small intestine. The right ascending colon is where, when they do colonoscopes to put fecal transplants in the 80s and 90s, they do it with a colonoscopy and drop it in the right ascending colon. You talk to any gastroenterologist, the right ascending colon's their target for bacteria when they want to put it back to stop C. diff or treat patients.
Hmm.
Um, that's always been the target area. but you have bacteria for you have you have a microbiome in your mouth. When they look at plaques in the brain for Alzheimer's and stuff, they mimic the plaques of bacteria. They have the same biome as your oral species and as your gut species. When they look at Alzheimer's patients and they
I
comb
just
through
want
their
to back up time because
yeah,
there's
yeah,
so much.
yeah,
I mean, it's
yeah.
such,
I know. I can.
yeah,
I can
it's
go
so
around the whole.
rich, and I want to kind of help
Mm-hmm.
my audience kind of take it
In
in a way that it's going to help them really remember it, and
Mm-hmm.
also be able to integrate changes into their life that might
Yeah.
help them. So we're talking, with the intestine and the bacteria is living in the mucosa. So 100 trillion cells, bacterial organisms living within us. Most of them are a combination of our skin and our gut. We're talking about
Mm-hmm.
the gut, and the gut, they live in the lining of the gut. So
Right.
it's that area that they're lining, and so you have the 100 trillion bacteria, let's whatever,
Yeah.
living there, and they're taking in stuff that you're taking in, and they're
Right.
spitting stuff out that you may not want to be spit out. But also, you talked about the antibiotics in food, and when you said a
Mm-hmm.
macrolide antibiotic, now
Mm-hmm.
many of you know Z-Pak, right?
Right.
It's prescribed like candy. If you have a cold, you go to the doctor, they give you Z-Pak. Well, that's a macrolide antibiotic, and
Azithromycin.
erythromycin. It's a type of erythromycin, a macrolide antibiotic. So you're taking basically, as Ty is saying, in some foods, you're taking in that antibiotic in within the food. So take us
Right.
down that path. You ingest
Yeah.
it, you come
Mm-hmm.
into the intestine, the lining of the intestine, the bacteria is there. So what's happening with the food and the antibiotics that you're ingesting?
So so it's altering that microbiome. It has activity against certain species, and there's spectrums of, when you talk to any infectious disease doctor, they look at spectrums of antibiotics, and their goal is to go with the narrowest spectrum of bacteria or antibiotic for the bacteria they're trying to treat. A lot of them don't like broad spectrum antibiotics where they
Right,
kill everything or they mass wipe out.
right.
And so when you're eating food that might have an antibiotic in it, like natamycin, and natamycin spectrum is different than azithromycin. It's in the same class, but
Yes.
it won't have the same activity against bacteria. But your dominant strains of bacteria in your gut are the Bacteroides phylum and the Firmicutes phylum. Those are your dominant strains. You get your biome in your first 300 days of birth, and then it changes over time.
Mm.
And like we were talking about earlier, what are the things that alter the biome? Well, we kind of got off on a tangent, but your bacteria live in that mucosal layer. So there's twofold to survival of your gut microbiome. One is its home being thick, rich, and healthy. Um, and so emulsifiers in foods like sodium citrate, polysorbate 80, carrageenan gum, gar gum, locust bean gum. Those are all emulsifiers in products to keep them from separating, to
Mm.
keep it, to keep that coffee creamer looking rich and creamy. You put an emulsifier in there to keep it that way. Well, when your gut, it thins out that lining. As that lining thins out, your bacteria is exposed to stomach acid. It's exposed to just being, you know, pooped out or removed. You're shedding bacteria and stuff every day. But the richness of that mucosa can, matters to how diverse and rich your biome and healthy your biome is.
So the
You,
so the so let me just get it straight so I understand, my audience understands.
yeah,
So the layer that lines the colon, the intestines, the GI tract, that lining is like the walls of a home,
yeah,
of the bacterial's home. So
yeah,
it's protecting them. The mucus layer, the mucus, the cells of that lining is acting like a wall. And you're saying that some of the foods that you mentioned, they're wearing down that wall. Is that the kind
Yeah,
of breaking it
ab-
down?
absolutely, absolutely. You've heard guys like Stephen Gundry talk about uh, um, small perforations or in the gut lining where
Right.
I believe they call it
Leaky gut.
leak. Yes,
Right.
call it leaky gut syndrome. Well, yes, and there's a lot of little things that can perf that wall, so to speak. Um, and the biggest culprit are emulsifiers, excipients, flow agents in foods. They fall under a terminology in the FDA called GRAS, generally recognized as safe. You've
Hmm.
probably heard this administration talk about it,
Yes.
trying to change those rules. Only in the United States do we not make those food additives go through rigorous safety testing. Like
Hmm.
in Europe they do, or they just don't let you put those things in food in Europe. That's why when you go to Italy, you eat pasta and you eat everything and you still feel great and you come home and you lost some weight. It's because they don't have the same preservatives and processes in their processed foods that
Mm.
we do. And what we're seeing, we've been seeing this for 12 years, is these things have affected the microbiome dramatically. But in, like we said earlier, being the biggest blind spot in medicine, there was no one really looking at it. 3 years ago, there might have been two pharma companies or industry companies looking at this space. Today, there are 200.
Mm.
Uh, there's some companies doing some fascinating things with the gut microbiome.
Yeah.
There's a company out of France, Mott Pharma. They're doing some phenomenal work in the gut microbiome and cancer. They're in phase 3B for products in that space, in conjunction with checkpoint inhibitors. But back to your point,
Yeah.
there's a ton of things that affect that. Well, so it's twofold to keep your bacteria healthy. One is to proliferate bacteria and to keep it growing and healthy. So if you have a good, diverse, rich biome, yeah, prebiotic, fiber, and a little more animal-based food actually is great for the biome. But and then the lining is protecting that lining, protecting eating things that bolster that mucosa, help feed it. Things like zonulin and stuff help that divert to become more enriched, if you will.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there's so many pitfalls in food, to be honest.
Yeah. And I think that really it's because the it's so enormous, the amount of bacterial organisms. It's very hard to make a intervention here and not affect something over here, and that's
Correct.
where supplementing probiotics and that is difficult. So I think for just the everyday person, the most
Hmm.
important thing to do is to stay healthy, and to stay healthy, have a healthy microbiome, and it just kind of goes along with people just don't want to hear diet and exercise, right?
Right,
It's
right.
just right. Just don't tell me another thing. I just diet and exercise. Well, a good diet, that which is one thing is devoid of toxins, like
Right.
alcohol, for instance, that's
Hmm.
going to destroy your good bacteria. You don't want things to destroy your good bacteria, and you
Hmm.
like antibiotics in food, like the fillers that you're talking about, the expanders,
Hmm.
and you also want to eat foods that might be rich in natural uh,
Yeah,
bacteria that
yeah,
that can feed and help support a healthy microbiome. So it's you could take a Mediterranean diet, for instance, and show that that's a good diet for the microbiome. Then you could
yeah,
take a purely Western,
yeah.
preservative-filled,
Yeah,
carnivore diet that of not healthy raised animals, just
yeah,
whatever, and it's going to show that that's going to hurt your microbiome. So in a
So
way,
I,
yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So actually, yes, I think we get wrapped around the axle in the United States around diet with the word diet and this
Yeah,
diet and that diet, the ketogenic diet, the Mediterranean diet, these kind of things. And the problem with that is there's twofold in that. One, we don't talk about the preparation of the food in that diet. I
yeah.
think the biggest destructor of the gut microbiome and the lining of that mucosa is seed oils.
Hmm.
Seed oils. Any seed oil, anywhere that nature, it was not made to be a fat. It was not
Hmm.
made to be an oil. So no canola oil, no soybean oil, no uh, palm oil, no any of the oils. If you can't press that plant and get an oil, you shouldn't eat it.
No, oh,
So
interesting.
and so
Interesting.
it,
Okay.
I my biggest pet peeve, if you will, is when
Hmm.
people, because there are people following a Mediterranean diet that aren't making strides, right? Because it's the way they prep their food. It's the same with the ketogenic diet. It there's a multitude of things that they do, but you're not getting the full aspect of that diet. I would tell you, when you're eating, just pay attention to your microbiome. Eat foods that, if you're eating vegetables, eat vegetables that fall from the plant. Zucchini's great. Squashes, those, anything that falls off the plant. When you're prepping that food, when you're buying that
What is
food,
an example of a vegetable that does not fall off a plant?
like shoots and roots and stems and leaves of the plant. When you're
Okay.
like kale and spinach, it has a lot of high. It's high in oxalates, and oxalates are really hard on the gut.
Hmm.
When they look at people with IBS and Crohn's and colitis, a lot of those are vegetarians and vegans, and they have a lot of fibrous foods, right? Well, it's really the plants that they're eating and the prep of the plant, the way they eat it. If I think the biggest insults to the gut microbiome are artificial milks like soy milk and almond milk and oat milk. Those weren't made for your gut. I mean, they have emulsifiers like they have to have thickening agents and emulsifiers and seed oils in them to make them. And those are so hard on the gut microbiome and the lining of the gut. When you look at the way you prep food, you should prep in clarified butter or avocado oil or pure olive oil, or even an animal fat, like a real, like tallow. Tallow is
Hmm.
probably quintessentially the best for the gut microbiome,
Right,
hands
but
down.
so just backing up. So I know you always hear and you hear kind of the new movement
Mhm.
with RFK Jr. talking a lot about tallow, and I just think back to the jugs of Crisco oil that were
Right.
that are at room temperature are a solid, and
Yeah.
it just didn't seem like that was a good thing for our body. So
Right.
what?
But you
Yeah,
also named a brand, right? So a
yeah,
brand is processed, a
okay,
process. Our ancestors, three generations back or two generation backs, depending on the family you're in, my grandmother, I live in Oklahoma. My grandmother would reduce tallow in a crock pot, by taking the trimmings from the butcher and just throw the fat into a crock pot, heat it, pour it into a mason jar, and that was it. When you look at
mm,
modern day processed tallow, there'll be deodorizers in there to take out the smell of the beef or the flavor of the beef. There'll be TBHQ as a preservative to keep it shelf stable, but tallow is stable in itself on its own for a long time.
mm,
Pork fats. I mean, it just depends. If you don't do pork, that's fine. Don't do lard. But
yeah,
Crisco is a vegetable oil actually now.
okay,
Early on, Crisco was a lard. Lard is pork fat, and tallow is beef fat. But today, a jar of Crisco, even though it's solid when you buy it, is a vegetable shortening. And that's highly processed. To make a seed oil, what they do is they'll take the seed of a plant. So if it's say the rape seed, or cotton seed or soybean, they take that seed and they soak it in hexamethane gas. Hexamethane gas is a byproduct of the petroleum industry. That
Yeah, it doesn't
gas,
sound good for you.
right. It denatures the fat in the seed, pulls the fat out of the seed. They heat it up to 250 degrees, and then they process that out to an oil. And they're great in a sense. They look great, they're clean, they don't smell, but they're so bad for the gut. They were never meant to be eaten. Originally, seed oils were for the ag industry to oil machinery, and that was the original thought process. But farmers didn't like it because it was so sticky. It was so sticky that the chaff would stick to it and everything. It would just kind of gum up the machine. So they passed it off, and they're like, we weren't going to use it. Well, the companies were like, we got all this technology, we made this. What can we do with it? Well, let's cook in it.
Right, because it could withstand a higher heat
right. It can
than some
withstand
of the other oils.
absolutely.
Yeah.
And then they had some flawed data. If you go back and look at that data for heart disease, it was based, they've now decided that data was flawed. I mean, I've been in the industry for 30 years. You can do a study any way you want to make it look any way you want it to
Key
look.
point.
I mean, you know that more than anyone, being a doctor all those years. You've seen many a study come through your office, and you've been like, this is not that good of a study, or it's pretty biased. You can see the biases in those studies, and the industry's pretty strong. I mean, that's a $500 billion a year industry, and it's not going to go quietly. I saw someone sent me a paper yesterday, and I get papers every day. I mean, look at this stack of papers. I mean, and someone sent me a paper the other day, just 2 days ago, that the industry's put out saying that seed oils are not bad for you. But I can tell you, looking back over 5,000 years of history, if you look at centenarians, most of them are still, the thing about centenarians is they're usually in more impoverished areas, right? So they've grown their own food, so they have a good soil microbiome. That's a whole nother thing in commercial farmer. I would tell everybody to look at the lunatic farmer out of Virginia. He does regenerative farming. He looks at soil microbiomes. We know that in a plant, like if you took a bell pepper from someone that's done commercial farming, NPK farming. So NPK farming is nitrogen-based or petroleum-based fertilizers, like nitrogen, phosphorus, where they make that from petroleum byproduct. And then those plants look amazing. But when they really boil down to the mineral content and the nutritional content, it's poor. It's very poor. That's why when you go buy a tomato, buy non-GMO, buy organic if you can, more likely locally grown, because they're still using manure. And earthworms are great in the soil. They're not present on a lot of commercial farms. But it just kind of goes back, in my opinion, it's old. What is old is new again, right? I mean, for your health, if you're looking at real health, it's more about what you eat and how you prepared it versus, I mean, it's easy to go vilify processed foods, right? I mean, processed carbs, processed things. But really, it boils down to the cleanest, most organic way that food made it to your table, and then how you prepped it,
That's a great point. The great point,
so,
because it's the when you wonder, when I'm walking my dog, let's say in the park, I always wonder in one step the amount of organisms that are under that step. So it really, when we grow things in the ground. It's
Hmm.
and it's just getting the net. We're symbiotic with it, and symbiotic
Absolutely.
with our environment. And um, yeah, so I think those are the main points: what we eat, how we
Yeah.
prepare it, as you said, what else are things we're taking in our body that might knock off the microbiome. So
Hmm.
I just want to segue a little bit to a couple things. How we add bacteria into our body in
Hmm.
a way that's healthy. So you mentioned, the fecal transplants. There's the prebiotics you mentioned, which is kind of food for the bacteria, the gut, the fructooligosaccharide
Hmm.
products, the inulin that's what that is, and that feeds the bacteria to help them grow. So but there's the whole industry of probiotics, which now
Yes.
is all over the place, and people don't know
Huge.
what to do, what to
Yeah.
take. 60 billion organisms. Does it need to be refrigerated? Whatever. So I
Yeah.
wanted to talk about how we add it back. So maybe start with actually the fecal transplant.
Okay.
Talk a little bit
Okay.
about that, okay? Because
Yeah.
that blows people's mind. It sounds so gross,
Yeah. Yeah.
but it can be very effective and for the purpose of adding back bacteria.
So fecal transplants are probably the fastest way to bring back bacteria into your gut. It's the and probably I mean, if there were a gold standard, which there's not right now, and there hadn't been a lot of oversight over fecal transplants up until probably the last 2 years. In fact, the federal government's got involved. The FDA is getting more involved. There's 2 FDA approved products in the space. We'll probably have three more in the next 3 years. We'll have five probably in the next 5 years. Um, but they're 2,000 years old. The Chinese did the first one in 4 BC. It was a
Wow.
pandemic of a dysentery outbreak. Um, and then they just fed stool to people that had dysentery from people that did not have dysentery, and it stopped their pandemic.
So
It stopped
they
them.
fed them
Yeah,
orally. Okay.
yeah. It was called yellow soup. They actually prepared it into a soup, and it was
Oh
served
my
cold,
God.
and you ate this yellow soup. Yeah, and but fascinatingly, it literally stopped a pandemic of dysentery in China in 4 BC,
Mm,
and then and then it's been used throughout the centuries over in tons. In the Middle East, 500 years later, they had a cholera outbreak, and they actually used camel dung and fed camel dung to people
wow.
with cholera, and it worked. And so the microbiome is when you take live bacteria
Wait,
from a
I'm just
goat.
gonna just a
Yeah,
just an aside.
yeah,
Cholera. You hear a disease, but cholera is from an actual bacteria called Vibrio cholera. Okay, so it's
hmm,
Vibrio
yeah,
cholera is an actual organism that
yes.
is a bacterial organism that
Mhm.
causes cholera. I just wanted to point that out, just
Yes,
so the
yes. And
connection is
then
made.
today, the biggest pandemic is probably Clostridium difficile. You'll see, I mean, as far as in GI uh,
Yeah.
type scenarios. There's about 450,000 cases every year of C. diff. They call it C. diff in the medical community, or Clostridium difficile. Previously, I believe Knackles called it pseudomembranous colitis and then later changed it. Like you said earlier, it is an organism that we carry in our biome every day. We have a phylum of Clostridium species in our gut. And when they're in check with the rest of our biome, they're actually beneficial bacteria in some sense. What happens in today's society is you go for a, a procedure, or you get a broad spectrum antibiotic, and it kills off the good bacteria, and the Clostridium grows faster than the rest of your biome does, and so it overgrows, and you get explosive diarrhea. I mean, where you go to the bathroom 28 times a day.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and of C. diff sufferers, of patients that get current data, 1 in 12 patients will die from C. diff. Of the 450,000 cases a year, 38% of those will have a second recurrence, or
Wow.
they'll have a recurrence. Of the 38% that get a recurrence, 68% of those will just continue to have multiple recurrences over and over again. The standard therapy to treat C. diff is an antibiotic, either vancomycin or fidaxomicin, or even metronidazole is an antibiotic it's the oldest one. A lot of the American Society of Gastroenterologists recommend Vanc or Fidaxo,
Right.
IDSA, the
So
infection.
yeah, I just want to, very important, and C. diff is very important, and it's a
Yeah.
very important bacteria that overgrows, like as you said, and could be very dangerous. So fecal transplants, might be used for the cases that cannot be cured by those antibiotics, and that's the overgrowth of a bad bacteria. So you want to add back a good bacteria, right? So,
Yeah.
and in fact, in the cases of C. diff, you even can add back the Saccharomyces organisms,
Yeah.
to try to combat that or even prevent it.
Right.
And that's one thing I used to always do with patients I put on antibiotics is give them a probiotic with Saccharomyces in it. So you have the fecal transplants, which
Hmm.
is, the doctors are doing for all sorts of ailments. But there's also now the supplement industry of
Hmm.
probiotics, and
Yeah.
what kind of give us an overview
Okay.
of that,
So,
if you could.
okay. Yeah. So probiotics, they're there's a lot out there, and they're, in my opinion, they're only as good as the capsule that they're in, and the quality of that bacteria and their process, because probiotics generally don't graft back into your microbiome. They only interact with the biome that you had. I
Mm,
recently just saw a paper yesterday where uh, to me, it was kind of groundbreaking, because their data showed that about 5% of probiotic patients did get an engraftment into their microbiome, which was huge, because we've never, or science had, all the other studies prior to had differing data in that space. But a probiotic is put into a capsule. It's usually a desiccated or freeze dried bacteria, usually from a bovine strain, like lactobacillus, bifidobacteria. Now there's probiotics for Akkermansia, and all the Saccharomyces. But probiotics are freeze dried or desiccated. They're put into a capsule. You swallow it, that capsule degrades over time, that bacteria is released, it has to absorb fluid to bloom back. And so the thought process of a good probiotic is one where that capsule has the technology to not degrade until it's in the intestine. So it
interesting.
bypasses the stomach, because if that bacteria blooms in the stomach, it's also exposed to acid in the stomach, and it's usually killed off, or decimated in that sense. But probiotics, you were saying a point earlier in the show where you talked about the biome in the gut is, like you said, is symbiotic, and these bacteria, they live in conjunction with each other, and they feed off of each other, and they produce metabolites, and each of these metabolites are so important to brain function, to kidney function, to heart function, to cholesterol in the body, to so many things. Some make short chain fatty acids like butyrate and propionic acid. Those are great for the brain. They cut down on depression and Parkinson's and Alzheimer's and a multitude of things. These short chain fatty acids of producers are Akkermansia, Fecal-Bacterium pronitzii, bifidobacteria. those bacteria are your short chain fatty acid producers.
Mm.
Um, but probiotics, their goal is to interact with the biome that you have currently. So if you don't have a diverse, rich microbiome, that probiotic's not doing a lot for you in that sense.
Interesting.
You need to put bacteria back, live bacteria that are going to graft in and become a part of your everyday biome. Bifid or Bacteroides bacteria and Firmicutes bacteria, we know their metabolite is GLP-1.
Mm.
The UCLA did some great studies in weight loss and obesity where they just did fecal transplants in obesity, and they had phenomenal results. If you have more Bacteroides bacteria in your gut, you can't store fat in adipose tissue.
Wow.
You stay insulin sensitive, and a byproduct is GLP-1. Now you see this GLP-1 market, Ozempic, Wegovy, those are all made from a synthetic source. They actually use Gila monster venom to make that GLP-1.
Right.
But most of us with a healthy, diverse gut, we make GLP-1 every day, every meal we eat.
Yeah.
The metabolite
Interesting.
of
Yeah.
that biome is GLP-1. So probiotics, I think, can be good. I don't dislike probiotics. It just depends on how healthy your biome is and what quality one you're taking. I don't think a lot of the ones you pick up at Walgreens or Rite Aid are that great compared to some of the ones where the companies have spent a little more time, with the technology of capsules and the quality of the bacteria that they're using.
Yeah, it has to be in the process. I mean,
Right.
it just has to be a process that is going to maintain the integrity, like you said, to have the capsule and yeah.
Mhm.
So, Ty, I mean, we could go on
Oh, for
forever,
days. Yeah.
days, and this is such great information. I think the take home, and correct me if I'm wrong, but the take home is in what you're eating, how you're preparing it, and that's going to maintain a healthy microbiome without you thinking about it, avoiding,
Absolutely.
yeah, avoiding the poisons, if you will, that
Yeah.
we have some certain additives, certain other things like alcohol and that sort of thing.
Mhm.
Taking a lot of antacids,
Yes.
really prescription or even over the counter, the ones that
Mhm.
are what are called the proton pump inhibitors, like the Prilosec or the Nexiums, because we do need stomach acid. Things like
Absolutely.
Pepsid or Zantac are not as strong at killing the acid, so those in moderation are probably better than taking those that kill the acid
Mm.
completely, which give you the rise to the bad bacteria,
Yeah.
and upsets that diversity and that balance. So,
Yeah.
any parting words for us, Ty? I know it's a
Yeah.
hard ask,
Yeah.
but
Yeah. No, I think the most important thing to take with you to the grocery store are your glasses. I think you should read labels. I think if you're eating for your microbiome, things like kimchi, sauerkraut, fermented foods are probably one of the most uh, diverse at building back your biome. I think yogurts, if there's no synthetic dyes or colors or emulsifiers or sugar alcohols are bad for your biome. I would stay away from aspartame, sucralose, stevia, any artificial sweeteners like that are really bad they alter that gut
mhm,
microbiome. Um, but yeah, proton pump inhibitors are horrible for your microbiome. I
yeah,
mean, there's ways to fix that naturally.
yes,
I
absolutely,
think we've gotten away from good mineral salts, right? I mean, mineral salts are great. Sea salts that have magnesium, potassium in them naturally. Honey
yeah,
is we don't do enough with real good raw honey, and maple syrup are great. Those are great. They're high in magnesium. But yeah,
yeah,
I mean, I think it's just staying vigilant, staying aware, reading. You're your best advocate for your own health. Is listen to shows like Dr. Glassman's show, read, and think before you put it in your mouth.
Yeah,
So,
excellent. Excellent. And
so yeah,
congratulations, OKC, with their
yeah,
NBA victory last night.
yeah, yeah,
People of
yeah.
Oklahoma should be proud.
Yes, they're happy. There's a lot of
Yeah,
people happy in this town tonight
yeah,
for today,
yeah.
for sure. Yeah,
Excellent.
absolutely.
Yeah, so
Absolutely.
thanks again, Ty, and thank you
Yeah.
for joining us today on the Coach MD podcast. And until next time, I'm Dr. Charles, aka Coach MD, urging you to stay strong in mind, in body, and right here in soul.
Yes.
Bye for now.